The night sky over the small town of Millbrook erupted in a brilliant flash of light. A streaking fireball tore through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of smoke and debris in its wake. The object, clearly not a meteor, hurtled towards the dense forest on the outskirts of town. Elara clutched her young daughter, Navi, tightly as their small escape pod plummeted towards the unfamiliar planet. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of entry, and warning lights flashed across the battered control panel. Elara's four-fingered hands danced across the controls, desperately trying to stabilize their descent. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the failing engines. Navi whimpered, her large, luminous eyes wide with fear. With a thunderous crash, the pod slammed into the forest floor. Trees splintered and the earth trembled as the alien craft carved a deep furrow through the underbrush. When the ship finally came to rest, an eerie silence fell over the woods. Inside the battered hull, Elara stirred. Her violet skin was bruised and cut, but her first thought was for her child. "Navi, Navi, are you all right?" she called out, her voice hoarse. A small movement caught her eye, and she saw her daughter emerge from beneath a pile of emergency supplies. Navi's antenna twitched nervously as she looked around the darkened interior of the pod. "Mama, where are we?" the child asked, her voice trembling. Elara pulled herself to her feet, wincing at the pain in her side. She made her way to the ship's viewport, which was now cracked and smeared with dirt. Through the damaged glass, she could make out the shapes of tall trees and unfamiliar vegetation. "I'm not sure, little one," Elara admitted, "but we're far from the Galactic Confederacy now. We're safe from them." As her eyes adjusted to the darkness outside, Elara saw pinpricks of light in the distance. A settlement, perhaps. She felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. They needed help, but would the inhabitants of this world welcome them or fear them? Elara turned to the ship's computer, relieved to see that it was still partially functional. She initiated a scan of the local atmosphere and was surprised to find it breathable. At least they wouldn't suffocate immediately. "Navi, we need to leave the ship," Elara said gently. "This world's air is safe for us to breathe, but we don't know what other dangers might be out there. Stay close to me, all right?" Navi nodded, her antenna drooping slightly. "Will we ever see home again, Mama?" Elara's heart clenched at the question. Their homeworld, Lyra, had fallen to the Confederacy's relentless expansion. Millions had died, and countless more had been forced into servitude. She and Neve were among the lucky few who had managed to escape. "Our home is gone, little one," Elara said softly, kneeling to meet her daughter's gaze. "But perhaps we can find a new one here. We must be brave now, braver than we've ever been before." With a hiss of escaping air, the pod's hatch opened. Elara took a deep breath, inhaling the rich, unfamiliar scents of the alien forest. She helped Navi out of the wreckage, and together they took their first steps on Earth. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of unfamiliar creatures, and the distant rush of water. Elara's keen senses, evolved for the harsher environment of Lyra, easily picked up on the subtle vibrations and scents around them. "It's so green," Navi whispered in awe, her fear momentarily forgotten as she gazed at the lush foliage surrounding them. Elara nodded, equally amazed. Their own world had been largely barren, with only hardy, spiky vegetation surviving in the harsh climate. This abundance of life was almost overwhelming. As they made their way through the underbrush, Elara kept a watchful eye out for any sign of intelligent life. The lights she had seen earlier seemed to be coming from beyond the edge of the forest. Should they risk approaching, or try to remain hidden? Their decision was made for them when a distant rumble reached Elara's ears. She looked up to see dark clouds gathering overhead. A storm was coming, and they needed shelter. "Come, Navi," Elara said, gently guiding her daughter towards the distant lights. "We must find shelter before the rain comes." As they neared the edge of the forest, the trees began to thin out. Elara could make out structures in the distance, buildings unlike anything she had seen before. They were smaller and less imposing than the grand architecture of Lyra, but they looked solid and warm. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the trees. Elara quickly pulled Navi behind a large trunk, her hearts racing. The light was accompanied by voices, the first sounds of the planet's dominant species that they had heard. "I'm telling you, Jack, I saw something come down in these woods," a gruff voice said. "Biggest damn shooting star I've ever seen." "Probably just a meteor, Earl," another voice replied. "But I suppose we'd better check it out. The sheriff would have our hides if we didn't investigate." Elara held her breath as the lights and voices drew nearer. She looked down at Navi, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. This was the moment that would determine their fate on this new world. Would these beings offer them sanctuary, or would they become just another threat to escape? As the footsteps crunched through the underbrush, drawing ever closer to their hiding spot, Elara made a decision. They couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, they would have to face the inhabitants of this world. Better to do it on their own terms. Taking a deep breath, Elara stepped out from behind the tree. Navi clutched tightly to her side. The beams of light immediately swung towards them, and she heard sharp intakes of breath from the two figures holding them. "Oh my God," one of the voices breathed. In the harsh glare of the flashlights, Elara raised her free hand in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Please," he said, using the rudimentary translation device embedded in her throat to convert her words into the local language. "We mean you no harm. We are refugees seeking sanctuary. Will you help us?" The forest fell silent as the two groups regarded each other, separated by mere meters and an unfathomable gulf of interstellar distance. In that moment, the future of two species hung in the balance, waiting to see which way the scales of fate would tip. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity to Elara. She could feel Navi trembling against her side, and she tightened her grip on her daughter reassuringly. The two humans, for that's what Elara assumed they were based on the intercepted transmissions she'd studied during their long journey, stood frozen, their lights still trained on the alien visitors. Finally, the one called Jack lowered his flashlight slightly. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "Earl, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Earl, the older of the two, nodded slowly. "Unless we both got into some bad moonshine, I reckon we are." He took a hesitant step forward, his weathered face a mix of awe and caution. You said you're refugees." Elara nodded, relieved that they were attempting communication. "Yes. Our world, it was taken from us. We had no choice but to flee." She gestured to the sky. "Our ship was damaged. We crashed in your forest." Jack, the younger man, seemed to shake himself out of his stupor. He lowered his flashlight completely and held up his hands in a gesture that mirrored Elara's earlier one. Okay. Let's all stay calm here. Nobody's gonna hurt anybody, right?" "We have no weapons," Elara assured them. "We seek only safety and shelter." As if on cue, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Earl glanced up at the gathering storm clouds, then back at the aliens. His expression softened slightly. "Well, we can't just leave you out here in the rain, can we?" He turned to his companion. "Jack, what do you think?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, clearly still processing the situation. I guess we should take them to the sheriff, or maybe call the government." Elara felt a spike of fear at the mention of government involvement. On too many worlds, that had meant detention, experimentation, or worse. "Please," she said quickly, "we only ask for temporary shelter. We do not wish to cause any trouble." Earl studied them for a long moment, his gaze lingering on Navi, who was peeking out from behind her mother's legs. Something in the old man's eyes softened. "Tell you what," he said, "my farm's not far from here. Why don't you come with us, get out of this weather, and we'll figure out what to do in the morning?" Jack looked at Earl in surprise. "Are you sure that's wise?" Earl shrugged. "Wise? Probably not. But it's the right thing to do." He turned back to Elara. What do you say? We've got a warm barn and some food to spare. It's not much, but it's better than being out in the storm. Elara felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a guarantee of long-term safety, but it was a start. We would be most grateful, she said, bowing her head slightly. As they began to walk towards Earl's farm, the first drops of rain began to fall. Navi looked up at the sky in wonder, having never seen rain before. The group made their way through the darkening forest, an unlikely quartet brought together by chance and compassion. Earl's farm was a modest affair, a small two-story house with peeling white paint, surrounded by fields of corn and a large red barn. As they approached, a dog began to bark, and a porch light flickered on. "That'll be Martha," Earl said. "My wife. She might need a moment to adjust to our guests." As if on cue, the front door opened, and a woman's voice called out, "Earl, is that you? Did you find what made that racket in the sky?" Earl cleared his throat. "Yes, dear. And we've got company. Now, don't be alarmed, but—" Martha stepped out onto the porch, her eyes widening as she caught sight of Elara and Navi. For a moment, she stood frozen, one hand clutched to her chest. Then, to everyone's surprise, she let out a small laugh. "Well," she said, shaking her head, "I always told you the universe was full of surprises, didn't I, Earl? Don't just stand there in the rain, all of you. Come inside." As they entered the warm, cluttered living room of the farmhouse, Elara felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, that it found a safe haven after all. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Martha, after her initial shock, threw herself into the role of hostess with gusto. She fussed over Navi, cucking sympathetically at the child's obvious exhaustion and fear. She rummaged through old clothes, finding an oversized t-shirt for Elara and a child's pajamas that almost fit Navi. Jack, still visibly nervous, excused himself to make some calls. Elara watched him go with a mixture of apprehension and resignation. She knew their presence couldn't remain a secret forever, but she had hoped for a little more time to understand this new world before facing its authorities. As Martha busied herself in the kitchen, preparing a late-night meal, Earl sat across from Elara in the living room. His weathered face was creased with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "So," he said, his voice gentle, "want to tell me a bit more about where you came from and how you ended up here?" Elara took a deep breath, considering how much to reveal. These humans had shown her kindness, but caution was still necessary. Our world, Lyra, was peaceful. We were not a warlike people. When the Galactic Confederacy came, we were unprepared. She paused, the memories of fire and destruction still fresh in her mind. They claimed our resources, our labor. Those who resisted did not survive. Navi and I were lucky. We managed to escape on a small transport along with others, but we were separated in the journey. I don't know if any of the others survived. Earl listened intently, his expression grave. When Elara finished, he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. No one should have to flee their home like that." Just then, Martha returned with a tray of steaming mugs. "I wasn't sure what you folks might like, so I made hot chocolate. It's good for soothing nerves, if you ask me." Navi, who had been quiet until now, perked up at the sweet smell. Elara watched in amusement as her daughter cautiously took a sip, her eyes widening in delight. "It's good, Mama," she exclaimed, a smile breaking across her face for the first time since their ordeal began. As they sipped their drinks, Jack returned, his expression troubled. "I spoke with Sheriff Davis," he said. He's coming over, and he's bringing some government folks with him." Elara felt her heart sink. She set down her mug and stood, ready to flee if necessary. "Perhaps we should go," she said. "We do not wish to cause you any trouble." But Earl stood as well, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Now, hold on there. You're our guests, and we're not about to throw you out to the wolves. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Martha nodded firmly. "That's right. You and your little one are under our roof now, and that means something in these parts." As headlights appeared in the driveway, signaling the arrival of the authorities, Elara felt a complex mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, but also a growing warmth towards these humans who had taken them in without hesitation. Whatever came next, she realized, they would not face it alone. And on this strange, beautiful world so far from home, that knowledge was more precious than any treasure in the galaxy. The arrival of Sheriff Davis and the government officials marked the beginning of a whirlwind few days for Elara and Navi. To their relief, the authorities' approach was cautious but not hostile. After hours of questioning and examinations, it was decided that, for the time being, the alien refugees would remain under the care of Earl and Martha, with regular check-ins from officials. As word spread through the small town of Millbrook, curiosity overcame fear. The farm became a hub of activity, with locals dropping by under various pretexts, all hoping to catch a glimpse of their extraterrestrial visitors. Elara found herself constantly amazed by the humans' resilience and adaptability. Within days, the initial shock of their arrival had given way to a genuine desire to learn and understand. One sunny afternoon, about a week after their crash landing, Elara sat on the farmhouse porch with Martha, watching as Navi played in the yard with some of the local children. The sight of her daughter laughing and running, her earlier fears forgotten, brought a lump to Elara's throat. "She's adapting well," Martha observed, following Elara's gaze. "Children are remarkably resilient, aren't they?" Elara nodded. "Yes, they are. On Lyra, Navi never had the chance to play like this. Our cities were very different from your world." Martha leaned forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Tell me about it, your home, I mean. If you don't mind, that is." Elara closed her eyes for a moment, conjuring the image of her lost world. Lyra was beautiful in its own way. Our cities were built upwards, great spires of crystal and light that reached into the sky. The surface was harsh, mostly desert, but we had created oases of life within our structures. As she spoke, Elara's hands moved, almost of their own accord, sketching shapes in the air. To her surprise, she found that talking about Lyra didn't bring the sharp pain she had expected. Instead, there was a bittersweet warmth in sharing these memories. Martha listened intently, her face a mix of wonder and sympathy. When Elara finished, the human woman was quiet for a moment before speaking. "It sounds magnificent," she said softly, "and I'm so sorry you lost it. But I hope that maybe you can find something here that, while different, might become a new home." Elara felt a rush of gratitude towards this kind woman who had opened her home and her heart to strangers from the stars. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your world, your people, you've shown us more kindness than I dared hope for." As the days passed, Elara found herself becoming more integrated into the daily life of the farm and the town. She learned to help with simple chores, marveling at the tactile nature of human agriculture. On Lyra, food production had been a highly automated process. Here, there was a connection to the land that Elara found both primitive and deeply satisfying. Navi, for her part, became something of a local celebrity among the children. Her ability to change the color of her skin, a natural camouflage adaptation of their species, was a source of endless fascination and giggles. One evening, as Elara helped Martha prepare dinner, a task she was still getting the hang of, she overheard a conversation between Earl and Jack in the next room. "I'm telling you, Earl," Jack was saying, his voice excited, "the techniques they used for water conservation on their world, if we could adapt that here, it could revolutionize farming in arid regions." Earl's response was measured but interested. "I reckon you might be right. But we've got to be careful, Jack. We can't just go announcing alien technology to the world. There'd be panic, or worse." Elara felt a mix of pride and concern. She was glad that her knowledge could potentially help her new friends, but she also worried about the implications of sharing too much too quickly. Later that night, as she tucked Navi into bed, The child had become enamored with the human custom of bedtime stories. Elara reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. "Mama," Navi said sleepily, her antenna twitching with contentment, "I like it here. The humans are nice. Can we stay?" Elara stroked her daughter's head gently. "We'll see, little one. For now we are safe, and that is what matters most." As the weeks turned into months, the novelty of the aliens' presence began to wear off, replaced by a growing sense of normalcy. Elara found work helping Earl and Martha on the farm, her natural affinity for botany proving invaluable. She also began teaching a small, informal class on Lyrian language and culture at the local community center, satisfying the townspeople's curiosity while helping to bridge the gap between their worlds. Navi started attending the local school, a decision that had initially caused some controversy but was now seen as a success story of integration. Her unique perspective and abilities made her a favorite among both students and teachers. One crisp autumn day, as Elara walked through the town square, she overheard a conversation that made her pause. "Did you hear?" one woman was saying to another. "The Johnsons' crop yield was up 30% this year. They say it's all thanks to that new irrigation system Earl's alien friend helped design." The other woman nodded. "I know. And did you see the article in the paper about how the hospital is looking into that Lyrian healing technique? Fascinating stuff." Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest. Slowly but surely, they were finding ways to contribute, to be more than just refugees. They were becoming part of the community. As she continued her walk, Elara's thoughts turned to the future. There were still challenges to face. The wider world beyond Millbrook was still largely unaware of their presence, and Elara knew that would have to change eventually. There were still nights when she woke up, heart racing, haunted by memories of what they had lost. But as she looked around at the familiar streets, at the humans going about their daily lives, at the place that was slowly becoming home, Elara felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. They had come to this world with nothing, fleeing destruction and despair. But here, among these strange yet wonderful humans, they had found not just sanctuary, but the chance for a new beginning. And for the first time since leaving Lyria, Elara allowed herself to believe that the best was yet to come. As autumn gave way to winter, the initial honeymoon period of Elara and Navi's integration into Millbrook began to face its first real challenges. The small town had largely embraced its alien residents, but as news of their presence slowly spread beyond the county lines, not everyone was as welcoming. One cold December morning, Elara woke to find Earl and Martha huddled around the kitchen table, their faces creased with worry. A newspaper lay spread before them, its headlines stark and alarming: "Alien infiltration in rural America." "I'm sorry, Elara," Martha said as she entered the room. "We were hoping to spare you from this nonsense." Elara picked up the paper, her heart sinking as she read. The article was full of wild speculation and fear-mongering, painting her and Navi as potential threats to national security. It quoted anonymous experts who warned of the dangers of alien technology and the possibility of an imminent invasion. "This is ridiculous," O growled, his usual calm demeanor ruffled. "Don't they realize you're refugees? That you've been nothing but helpful since you arrived?" Elara set the paper down, her mind racing. "I knew this day would come," she said softly. "We couldn't stay hidden forever." Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in Millbrook began to change. While many of the townspeople remained supportive, there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Elara noticed sideways glances and hushed conversations that stopped when she approached. Navi came home from school one day in tears, saying that some of the children had called her bug eyes and told her to go back to her own planet. The situation came to a head one snowy evening when Elara was walking home from the community center after teaching her Lyrian culture class. A group of men she didn't recognize stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. Well, one of them sneered. "If it isn't the alien, enjoying your stay on our planet." Elara's antenna twitched nervously, but she kept her voice calm. "Gentlemen, I mean no harm. I'm just trying to get home." "Home?" Another man spat. "This ain't your home. You don't belong here." As they advanced, Elara felt a mixture of fear and sadness. She had faced hatred on Lyra when the Confederacy came, but she had hoped things would be different here. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. "That's enough." Jack stepped into view, his face set in a determined frown. "Back off, boys. You don't want to do this." The men hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance. Jack stood his ground, joined moments later by several other townspeople who had heard the commotion. "You okay, Elara?" asked Mrs. Thompson, the kindergarten teacher. "Don't pay these fools any mind. They're not from around here." Outnumbered and facing the united front of Millbrook residents, the group of men slowly backed away, muttering threats under their breath. As the adrenaline faded, Elara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't expect." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We look out for our own here in Millbrook, and like it or not, you and Navy are part of our community now." The incident, while frightening, had an unexpected effect on the town. It seemed to galvanize the majority who supported Elara and Navy, reminding them of the values they held dear. The next town hall meeting was packed, with speaker after speaker standing up to denounce bigotry and reaffirm Millbrook's commitment to being a welcoming community. Mayor Johnson, a usually reserved man, gave an impassioned speech. "We've all benefited from the knowledge and skills our alien friends have shared," he declared. "They've helped improve our crops, our water management, even our healthcare. But more than that, they've enriched our lives with their friendship and their story of resilience. If we turn our backs on them now, we turn our backs on the very ideals that make us human." Despite the show of support, Elara knew that the challenges were far from over. The article had brought unwanted attention to Millbrook, and there were rumors of government officials and media personalities planning visits to the town. One evening, as she sat on the porch swing with Earl, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Elara voiced her concerns. "Perhaps Navi and I should leave," she said quietly. "Find somewhere more isolated, where we won't cause so much trouble." Earl was silent for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm. "Now you listen here, Elara. Running away isn't the answer. It never is. You and that little girl of yours have as much right to be here as anyone. More even, considering what you've been through." He turned to face her, his eyes bright with determination. "This town, this planet, it's got its share of problems, sure, but it's also got good people who are willing to stand up for what's right. And right now, what's right is making sure you and Navy have a place to call home." Elara felt tears welling up in her eyes, touched by the old farmer's words. "But what if things get worse? What if they try to take us away?" Earl's jaw set in a stubborn line. "Then we'll face it together. Your family now, whether you've got green skin or not. And family sticks together." As night fell and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Elara felt a renewed sense of determination. She had fled once before, leaving behind everything she knew. This time, she would stand her ground. This time, she had something, and someone worth fighting for. The road ahead would be difficult, she knew. The fear and mistrust they faced wouldn't disappear overnight. But as she looked out over the fields where she had worked alongside her human friends, at the town that had taken them in, Elara realized something important. They had already overcome impossible odds to make it this far. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them not as aliens and humans, but as neighbors, as friends, as a community united. And in that unity, there was strength, there was hope, there was home. The arrival of spring brought new challenges to Millbrook. As the snow melted and the fields began to green, the town found itself at the center of a media storm. Reporters from across the country descended on the small community, their cameras and microphones invasive and relentless. Elara and Navy tried to maintain their normal routines, but it became increasingly difficult. Every trip to the grocery store or walk in the park became an exercise in avoiding unwanted attention. The constant scrutiny was taking its toll, not just on them, but on the entire town. One particularly trying day, as Elara helped Earl in the fields, a news helicopter circled overhead, its rotors drowning out their conversation. Earl squinted up at the sky, his face a mask of frustration. "This ain't right," he muttered. "Folks can't even go about their business without being gawked at like animals in a zoo." Elara nodded, her antenna drooping slightly. "I'm sorry, Earl. I never meant to bring such chaos to your life." Earl waved off her apology. "Ain't your fault. It's just, well, I reckon people are scared of what they don't understand, and instead of trying to learn, they'd rather point fingers and make a fuss." As they worked, Elara's mind wandered to the future. How long could they continue like this? Would Nave ever have a normal childhood here? Her musings were interrupted by a distant rumble. At first, she thought it was more helicopters, but the sound was deeper, more ominous. Earl froze, his eyes widening as he looked towards the horizon. "Tornado," he breathed, the word barely audible over the growing roar. Elara had read about Earth's weather phenomena, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of the massive funnel cloud touching down in the distance. It was beautiful and terrifying, a force of nature unlike anything she had ever seen. Earl grabbed her arm. "We need to get to shelter now," he shouted over the wind that was quickly picking up speed. As they raced towards the farmhouse, Elara's heart pounded with fear. Not for herself, but for Navi. Her daughter was in town, at school. Would they know how to keep her safe? The next few hours were a blur of chaos and terror. The tornado tore through Millbrook with devastating force, ripping apart buildings and tossing cars like toys. In the aftermath, as the town emerged from their shelters, the scale of the destruction became clear. The school had been hit hard. As Elara ran through the debris-strewn streets, her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. She found Navi huddled with a group of other children in the basement of the library, shaken but unharmed. As the initial shock wore off, the town began to rally. Despite their differences, despite the tension of the past weeks, everyone came together in the face of this natural disaster. Elara found herself working alongside humans, using her strength and agility to help clear rubble and search for survivors. Her knowledge of Lyrian architecture proved unexpectedly useful. "The support beams in this type of building are similar to those we used on Lyra," she explained to the rescue team as they worked to free a group of people trapped in a collapsed store. "If we approach from this angle, we should be able to create a safe passage." As night fell, the true extent of the damage became clear. Many homes were destroyed, the town's infrastructure was in shambles, and resources were stretched thin. It was then that Elara made a decision that would change everything. Gathering the town leaders, including Earl, Martha, and Mayor Johnson, she took a deep breath and spoke. "There's something I need to show you," she said. "Something that might help." Leading them to the barn where her crashed ship had been stored, Elara revealed a secret she had kept since their arrival. Hidden within the wreckage was a small but powerful piece of Lyrian technology, a matter replicator. "On my world, we use these to create building materials, medical supplies, even food," she explained. "I was afraid to reveal it before, worried about how it might be misused. But now I think it's time." The implications were staggering. With this technology, they could rapidly produce the supplies needed to rebuild the town. But it also meant fully revealing the extent of Lyrian capabilities to the world. Mayor Johnson looked at the device, then at Elara, his expression serious. "You understand what this means, don't you? Once we use this, there's no going back. The whole world will know." Elara nodded. "I know, but this is my home now too, and if I can help, I have to try." The decision was made. As dawn broke, Elara stood before a hastily assembled press conference, Navi at her side. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions as she demonstrated the replicator's capabilities. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News of the alien miracle machine spread across the globe like wildfire. Government officials who had been skeptical of Elara's presence now clamored to speak with her. Scientists begged for the chance to study the technology. But in Millbrook, the focus remained on recovery. The replicator worked tirelessly, producing materials faster than they could be used. Homes were rebuilt, stronger than before. The school, the library, the town hall, all rose from the rubble, a testament to the combined efforts of human determination and alien technology. As the days passed, Elara noticed a change in the way people looked at her and Navi. The fear and suspicion that had clouded some eyes were replaced by gratitude and respect. They were no longer seen as potential threats, but as valuable members of the community who had chosen to share their gifts in a time of need. One evening, as the sun set on a town that was rapidly returning to normalcy, Elara stood with Earl on the porch of his rebuilt farmhouse. The old farmer looked out over his fields, a slight smile on his face. "You know," he said, "when you first crashed here, I thought it was the strangest thing that ever happened to this town. Now, I'm thinking it might have been the best." Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Earl, for everything." He shrugged, ever modest. "Oh, we didn't do nothing special, just treated you like people was all." As night fell and the stars came out, Elara looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there was Lyra, the home she had lost. But down here, on this beautiful, chaotic, wonderful planet, she'd have found something she thought she'd never have again, a place to belong. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more questions to answer, more bridges to build between their worlds. But for the first time since she had fled her dying planet, Elara felt truly, deeply hopeful about the future. Here, among these humans who had become her friends, her family, she and Navi had found not just refuge, but a chance to make a real difference. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. In the months following the tornado and the revelation of Lyrian technology, Millbrook underwent a transformation that few could have imagined. The town became a symbol of human-alien cooperation, drawing visitors and researchers from around the world. Elara found herself at the center of it all, working tirelessly to bridge the gap between her advanced knowledge and Earth's current capabilities. She established a research center on the outskirts of town, where scientists from various fields collaborated to adapt Lyrian innovations for human use. Navi, now fluent in English and fully integrated into the school system, became an ambassador in her own right. Her natural curiosity and ability to explain complex Lyrian concepts in simple terms made her a favorite among visiting dignitaries and documentary crews alike. One crisp autumn morning, almost 2 years after their crash landing, Elara stood before a crowd gathered in the town square. The occasion was the unveiling of a new monument, a sleek obelisk that combined Earth materials with Lyrian design, symbolizing the union of their two worlds. "Friends," Elara began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "when Navi and I arrived on your planet, we were lost, alone, and afraid. We had fled destruction, leaving behind everything we knew and loved. But here, in this small corner of Earth, we found something we never expected, a new home." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the familiar faces. Earl and Martha sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Mayor Johnson stood nearby, nodding encouragingly. "This monument," Elara continued, gesturing to the obelisk, "represents more than just a melding of our technologies. It stands for the very best of both our worlds, the resilience, the compassion, and the endless capacity for growth that we share." As she spoke, Elara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. There had been challenges, certainly. The initial fear and mistrust hadn't disappeared overnight. There were still those who viewed her and Navi with suspicion, who feared the changes their presence had brought. But for every voice of doubt, there were many more raised in support. The benefits of Lyrian technology, cleaner energy, More efficient agriculture, advanced medical treatments were becoming impossible to ignore. Slowly but surely, the world was coming to see that cooperation was not just possible, but essential for progress. Today, Elara said, her voice strong with emotion, we look to the future. A future where the boundaries between our species fade, where we learn from each other and grow together. Navi and I may have come from the stars, but it is here, on Earth, that we have found our true home. As applause erupted from the crowd, Elara felt a tug on her hand. She looked down to see Navi, her eyes shining with excitement. Mama, Navi whispered, can I say something too? Elara nodded, stepping aside to let her daughter take the microphone. Navi cleared her throat, suddenly seeming very grown up in her Earth clothes, her antenna twitching slightly with nerves. Hi everyone, she began. I just wanted to say, thank you. When we first came here, I was scared. Everything was so different, but you made us feel welcome. You became our friends, our family. And now I can't imagine living anywhere else. Navi's simple words seemed to touch the crowd deeply. Elara saw tears in Martha's eyes, and even the usually stoic Earl looked moved. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Elara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Jack, now the lead engineer at the research center, approached with a grin. You know, he said, I've been thinking. With the advances we've made in propulsion technology, we might be able to start looking beyond Earth. Exploration, maybe even finding other refugees like yourselves. Elara felt a flutter of excitement at the idea. That would be incredible, she said, to think that we might help others the way Millbrook helped us. As the day wore on, Elara took a moment to herself, walking to the edge of town where she could see the fields stretching out to the horizon. The Earth sky, once so alien to her, now felt as familiar as Lyria's ever had. She thought about the life they had left behind, the world they had lost. The pain of that loss would never fully fade, she knew. But here, on this beautiful, complex planet, they had found something precious, a second chance. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the warm Earth sun on her face. She thought of the friends they had made, the lives they had touched. She thought of Navi, growing and thriving in ways that would never have been possible on Lyria. And she realized that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Their journey had brought them across the stars, through fear and loss and uncertainty, but it had also brought them here, to this moment, to this new life full of possibility. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: they were home. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.